Welcome back to Lobby Concessionals, the movie podcast where nobody's right and everybody's wrong. I'm Parker, and that's Brendan. Follow us along, like and subscribe. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on Amazon Podcasts, we're on Apple Podcasts.
Napster.
Maybe?
LimeWire.
Yeah, check LimeWire. Yeah, hit us up.
Pass us along to all your ICQ friends.
Burn a mixtape. Yeah. Today, we want to take a quick look at or not a quick look, like a normal look.
Never quick.
A normal look at some film genres. What I thought was interesting while I was kind of looking around about this is I had looked at I found a chart, which is very interesting in itself. Charts, love charts. That took a look at film genre popularity for the past 100 years. And specifically, just to kind of give it a caveat, looked at from 1910 to 2018. And it's these numbers are based on the percentage of films released in that year or decade or whatever that had that genre tag on IMDb. So, if any movie has a comedy tag on IMDb, this chart would say that, I don't know, 20% of movies released this year were comedies. Even if, they're tagging, I don't know, someone incorrectly tagged Schindler's List with a comedy tag, right?
Had to pick Schindler's List.
I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm just saying that theoretically, you have to kind of keep some of these numbers with a bit of a grain of salt. The cool thing is looking over the full century, you kind of get an idea of when certain genres have been popular, which have stayed popular, which are consistently. So I have a couple ones I'd like to hear from you about, Brendan. Comedy, for instance, has stayed pretty consistently popular. Like basically the same number for that whole century. Yeah. So percentage of films released in a year, how many do you think would be classified as comedies?
As comedies in a year? And then we're talking the whole time. So 1910 to 2010 is what you're saying?
Yeah, and basically with 5 percentage points plus or minus, it stayed with it at the same number.
Oh,
so there hasn't really been big peaks or big lows for it.
Okay, so doing like mental math. Mm-hmm. I know there's not 4 genres of movie, but it feels like there's just 4 genre of movie. So the safe bet would be 25 to 30% would be comedy.
Yeah, and you're a little low potentially.
Low?
Yeah, I have it 30 to 40%.
Whoa.
Which doesn't surprise me.
No, I guess it doesn't.
Like, honestly, when I think of most new films that come out, you can classify a whole bunch of like famously, The Martian was classified as a comedy for the Golden Globes.
That's a different conversation.
And like, it's a very funny movie. There is plenty of jokes in that movie. Yeah. But it's not a comedy. However, should it have a comedy tag as well as, 5 other tags on IMDb? Maybe. Like, I don't know if I'd be totally upset about having that tag there.
Sure.
I'm weirded out that it's put under the comedy / musical. Granted, Martian's great. Happy that it got an award. It wouldn't have won in the drama category. But, like, come on, guys. Anyway, what about war films?
War films.
It has not stayed consistent.
No.
So, actually, you know what? My question is, when do you think the most popular time for war films is in the last 100 years? The most popular decade.
The most popular decade for war films?
Yeah.
In my mind, it would probably be the 60s and the 70s.
Shockingly, the 40s.
The 40s, like right after the war.
And during. So I actually think my guess is, and it's hard to tell, it's a graph, right?
Yeah.
But my guess is it's propaganda stuff. So there was a bunch of war
films
films
that makes sense.
They promote rah.
That makes sense.
Let's go to war kind of stuff. And then I assume immediately afterwards there's probably a flood of, this is what war is actually like kind of films.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so it only ever peaks at 14%. So 14% of films released in a year.
And that's in the 40s.
And that's in the 40s.
And it must crater to like...
Oh, yeah. It's like, and it basically stays at like 3 to 5% for the rest of it.
that's actually higher than I would think.
Yeah. But like, ugh. What's other one here? Sci-fi. Sci-fi was consistent. How many movies do you think in the last century are released? What percentage of movies are released in a year?
Do you roll sci-fi in with fantasy, or is this separate?
It is separate.
It's separate.
It is separate.
Sci-fi by itself, I'd put it in the 20%. Mate,
way wrong.
Way wrong.
2%.
2?
That shocked me. So I don't know again if that's just the data is wrong. But at the same time, there isn't that many sci-fi movies released in a year, really.
I guess so. I in my mind, I guess genre films all automatically go into there somewhere. Like
Sure.
All the superhero movies would be sci-fi.
Yeah, and I am curious to see actually where those did end up. I should have looked those up on IMDb actually. Damn. So in that same vein, then fantasy. What would you say? Again, stay pretty consistent for the
Stay
last
pretty consistent.
century?
If sci-fi is that low, in my mind, sci-fi and fantasy were always like lumped together.
Sure. Right.
So if I said 20% for sci-fi, in my mind, maybe that was sci-fi and fantasy. So what I would do is if you took out the 5% of sci-fi, I would be like 15-20% for fantasy.
Okay, that's a reasonable thing. That's that's logical. I see the argument.
There's some logic there.
Apparently, we're sitting at 4%, which also shocks me. So
combined, they make 9%.
Yeah,
that's a lie.
Yeah, like and again, I don't know. It could just be that they they're pretty vague categories. It's not like we have a superhero film category or anything in here.
Sure.
But I don't even see an action film. Like it wasn't like action was a general category. We had like comedy, war, romance, crime, sci-fi, musical, fantasy, documentary, and horror.
Oh.
So
super
I don't
weird.
even really know where lots of films would go.
Yeah.
Specifically. The only other thing that I found was really interesting here is documentaries have had at some point in there was a peak. And when do you think that would be? Like what era, what time?
The advent of Netflix.
Yeah, basically. It's a little bit earlier than that. So
Yeah.
it shoots up from about 5%. In the 90s, it shoots up to 25% and stays about there.
Yeah.
And I think my guess is it's because that's when film making equipment starts being cheaper. So it's literally just you can buy a digital camera, and then anyone can make a documentary now. So
Another
the
thing to
barriers
blame James
entry-
Cameron for.
But like documentaries are good, or some of them are, But yeah, anyone can make one, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
So while I was looking at this, what I've always found interesting was Westerns. And I've always sort of heard that in old Hollywood, Westerns were crazy. They were just grinded out like bonkers, and then we don't have Westerns really anymore. And I think that's on some ways true. Like, there definitely used to be, there was a heyday of Western films, and there is definitely less. However, when I took a look into it, apparently in like classic Hollywood, which I think is the 40s to the 60s, maybe 30s to the 60s.
Yeah.
I think it's in talkie era. So that's like classic Hollywood studio system. Maybe even the 70s, but I think probably depends on who you talk to. Only 7% of movies that are released are Westerns, which seems a little low to me.
I wonder if you took away like the 70s and the 60s and had to adjust in the 30s to the 50s, if that number doesn't shoot up really high.
Yeah, it could.
Right?
Absolutely. It could just be that we're looking at the full era as opposed to
when it's during its heyday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other thing that I thought was interesting is from 1930 to 1960, only 21 of the top 300 grossing movies are Westerns.
21 of the
top
300
for that 30-year period. So like the heyday of Westerns.
Yeah.
So what that seems to imply, and maybe I'm like this, that might be reaching here, but it seems to imply to me that Westerns are popular, they are seen, but they're not massive. We don't have a situation like, I don't know, an Avatar or a Endgame where it's everyone's seen it. So in some ways it might have been the market was a little flooded, even though it wasn't that flooded. But just that people didn't feel like they needed to see every Western, or that you got certain things out of some that other people didn't, and so they were never big blockbusters.
No, and they're still niche, right? At the end of the day, it's still a niche genre in a sea of niche genres.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So, and they were at the time. I think they were just cheaper to make. So the flood of them is just because studios could make a buck.
Well, and I guess that's a good point. Is that they don't have to hit the top 300 grossest or top grossing movies. 300 grossest movies is a bit different than 300 top grossing movies, so I need to make that distinction. But they don't have to hit that in order to be profitable and still be a worthwhile venture for the studio, especially when they're dirt cheap to make, or effectively dirt cheap.
Yeah, you put in $100,000 and make back $200,000, you're good.
Yeah, exactly. I did actually read too that apparently that's why Hollywood is where it is. Physically located there, is that Westerns at the time, which were popular, or that's one of the theories, is that it was easy to move to LA because it's easy to shoot around there.
Oh, that makes sense. That's cool.
Access to locations.
Yeah.
And so it's,
You would have thought Arizona.
But I don't think they wanted that either. They wanted it to still be beachy if they could have it.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you're filming stuff Gold Rush era and whatnot anyways, then that's where you'd be.
Yep, it would be historically accurate too. So, but anyway, part of the reason I launch into all of this is I find the concept of genres interesting, the concept of genre life cycles and evolutions interesting, and partially I find it interesting because I love superhero movies, and that conversation about the superhero genre and is it a genre, and is it a bubble, has been pretty prolific. I found conversations and articles online as early as I think 2011 was the earliest one I found, which is shocking to me given that at that point
3 years into the Marvel Universe.
In the Marvel Universe. Granted, I think our very first superhero film, I guess we can go back to the 70s, right, with Superman.
Yeah.
But we start getting into more modern superhero films with Blade, X-Men, and SpiderMan. I think the fact that those sort of three are out in and around the same time. Blade is 97, isn't it? Isn't that the first one?
98.
98.
Yeah.
And then I think it's Spider-Man is 2001 and X-Men is 2000, isn't it?
X-Men is 99.
99.
I believe, yeah. So
all sort of right in there.
Yeah.
And it's that modern age of superhero films. But even then, we're talking about, 10, 12 years removed from that. From the very first inklings of modern superhero films that people are already like, oh, it's a bubble. It's before the first Avengers is out.
Yeah.
And they're saying this is too much. I understand people have a concern with the fact that we get, I don't know, 3 or 4, typically 3, I think, MCU movies, not counting Disney Plus properties.
Sure. I think the most we've had in a year is 4.
I think 4, but I think they're aiming for 3 now. It looks like based on release schedule, it's 3 a year from the MCU. We were previously getting, I'd say fairly consistently, a DC film a year, or maybe every 2 years.
Yeah.
And then usually there's something else superhero related. We had Kick-Ass and Kick-Ass 2 for a little while there. Kingsman is sort of superhero-esque,
Wanted and things of that nature.
I would say you're probably looking at least 4 movies a year that are at the very least superhero adjacent.
I think we're probably more now.
Yeah?
I mean, if you think about DC alone this year coming up, I think there's 3.
What do we have coming up? 3?
Flash, Aquaman, and Black Adam.
Oh, sorry. We're talking 2023?
Yeah. No, 2022, I think.
2022.
I think
all 3 of them are coming out.
I'm pretty sure. Or even if they're not, that's still a 12-month window where 3 of them are coming out, plus 3 to 4 Marvel movies, plus a new SpiderVerse movie. Now we're starting, and
that's the other big one. Yeah, it's the Sony
and the Sony
side
stuff,
of it. Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
so like
yeah.
it's we're talking like one a month.
So like I understand. Not one. Okay, hold on.
It feels like it.
So I understand why people think there's maybe a bubble or there's issues with it, but 2011 we're getting
now we're talking about the evolution of that, like having a studio come in, kick the door down, and changing the way films are distributed, made, and viewed. Really, at the end of the day, right? Like nobody had ever attempted the tying all that universe stuff together. So now we're looking at a couple movies a year, and even if they're it's one thing to be like, that's a Batman movie and then there's a Superman movie, but it's another thing to be like, that's a Thor movie and a Captain America movie, but I have to watch both.
Well, you don't have to.
But you do. But that's the thing, is like, you don't have to, and everybody can say that as much as they want. But how do you watch an Avengers movie and you haven't watched the first Captain America and Thor movie?
As a person that watches every single one of those things multiple times, I understand that I am a hypocrite sitting here for what I'm about to say, but I honestly believe you can watch those movies.
No. Like I'm not saying structurally you couldn't, but culturally you couldn't. There's a pressure to make that stuff a priority.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right?
Fair enough.
Like all of a sudden you're one of 3 people who haven't watched Avengers because you didn't watch Iron Man 2. Like that's
I guess.
Right? And it's not that you don't have to watch Iron Man 2 at all.
Yeah.
You don't. But there's a weird thing about it's that weird FOMO thing.
Yeah.
To not be a part of the zeitgeist or the thing at the time.
That's a good point. And there is a little bit of a level of being required to watch it. And I guess, like my TikTok is flooded with whatever the latest Marvel thing is. Currently, when we are filming this, it is Moon Knight, but
it'll pivot to Doctor Strange in 2 weeks.
Yeah. It won't be that by the time this episode is released. So I always kind of just chalk that up to, like, TikTok was smart enough to figure out that I liked those things. It just fed me more of them. But it is interesting that there's that song that's featured. I think it's by something Humperdinck is the guy's name.
Engelbert
Humperdinck is his name. Yeah. You're correct. And his song is suddenly popular now because it was featured on the first episode of Moon Knight, and that's insane to me. So I literally saw he has a TikTok now where it's literally just the back of him and his song's playing. It's his back of his head, and he's like, "Is this my song?" And then he turns around and he goes, yes, it is. And it's supposed to be this reveal.
And it's the real Engelbert Humperdinck?
It is. It's the dude. And it's funny because no one knows who he is. So they do it as sort of like a dramatic reveal, but it's like, well, but the audience you're reaching out to in TikTok here does not know who you are. Yeah, so this dramatic reveal isn't clear unless you had a name tag that said, my name is Engelbert Humperdinck, Anyway, I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is I'm going to rant a bit about
TikTok?
No, Film Studies 101. As much as I love talking about TikTok. When I had done some film courses, one of the things we talked about was the film genre cycle. Are you familiar with this?
I am, but I want to hear you say it.
Well, I'm going to say it as if you weren't anyway. I just wanted to kind of involve you for half a second before I keep talking.
Yeah.
So there's 4 there's 4 stages. First being primitive. So that's what sort of starts defining tropes for that genre. Nothing's really set in stone, and that's when we start getting an idea of what this genre is going to be. Classical is the idealistic version of the genre. That is, where all the tropes have been established. That is, everything we've come to expect. Revisionist is typically stylistically complex, and it's switching up the film genre a bit. So usually conventions that have been established so far are exploited a bit, but they're ironic. However, it's still very much in that vein. And then finally we get to Parodic. We're going to go with parodic. That's how you say that word. And that's outright mockery of conventions. So the best way I've seen this produced, or I've seen examples of this, is for Westerns, just because the Westerns have had a very clear genre cycle. So starting out with primitive, we have the Great Train Robbery from 1903. It's it's widely considered to be the first blockbuster.
Yeah.
It's a silent film, worth a watch. I think it's like 10 minutes. Go ahead, watch it on YouTube. Worth a while. Then we get to classical. We don't get a classical Western until around like Stagecoach in the 30s, so 1939. Revisionist, we get High Noon in 1969. They start to play with some of those.
Yeah.
And then parody is Blazing Saddles, 73. And that's, the definition of parody right there.
Yeah.
So, first of all, we haven't found that with the superhero genre. We're not at that point where we've done a full cycle. I think that there has been some of those for sure. So, like primitive, I think we look at Blade. I think we look at actually no, maybe not even Blade. I would probably say
it's Batman 89.
Yeah, or
if we're
Superman?
talking, I mean Superman. Yes, but I think if we're talking about hype and blockbuster and taking over a segment of popular culture, it's Batman 89.
The only issue I have with that is that I don't think it defines genre.
It doesn't
the same way though. Like
it doesn't. But if we're talking about the blueprint for what's to come, and blockbusters and the superhero as the blockbuster, then I would put it as 89 Batman.
I think Superman does a good job though, giving us a origin story, gives us you kind of get a bit of a template in terms of you get an origin story, you get introduced to the character, you see him do some stuff, fights a bad guy.
Sure.
So in terms of that, there's a costume reveal at some point. Like some of those conventions start being defined. I think we could potentially argue Batman 89 is classical, even. Where that's more of those tropes have been cemented, right?
Maybe. I mean, it becomes almost academic at this point in terms of a conversation. If you want to do like traditional superhero stuff, without trying to have my comic book brain take over, because in that sense it's Superman and then it's Spider-Man. For if you want to evolve from a classic form, from primitive to classic. To Iron Man, and then whatever we are now, right? But like those would be my three pillars.
Yeah, and I think that I think one of the things is we haven't evolved to true parody yet. Like, do we have? We've seen movies that have that are maybe revisionist. They start playing with some of those themes. So, like, Kick-Ass is a good example, or there's that Rainn Wilson movie, Super, thank you.
Yeah.
That is also revisionist, but it's still definitely a superhero film, right?
Yeah, I would argue that James Gunn's Suicide Squad is borderline parody.
Maybe, but
within the genre, like in a serious take, it's not like laughing at superhero movies. It's very much still in the genre and still wants to be in the genre. But I do think it's an elevated type of parody to where we are.
Like we're playing with those tropes for sure.
Yeah,
I don't think we're at a point where we're actively making fun of them.
No, because the genre is still making money.
Well, and that's the thing.
Like Blazing Saddles is you're 10 years removed from the absolute height. Of Westerns, so it's time to make fun of them.
Yeah, oh, totally. And like, don't get me wrong, some of these things, like this isn't just because we've hit Blazing Saddles doesn't mean we can't have serious Westerns again. Obviously Unforgiven still happens, 3:10 to Yuma.
Yeah.
But there is definitely a bit of a life cycle to it. So first of all, I guess my argument would be we aren't at that point. We're truly parrying the genre yet, or not consistently.
We can do with accidental parodies like Morbius.
I think we have to take into account their intent.
Damn it.
But it would be a better parody film than it is.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's good. So I've seen a few things where people compare Westerns to superhero films and say, okay, superhero films are going to go the way of the Western, where suddenly they will be much fewer and far between because we had a glut of them for a little while there. What's your take on that? Like, personally, I don't agree with that.
I half agree with it.
Okay.
I don't think Marvel movies are going anywhere anytime soon. But I think anything outside of that, you could look at it as a bubble that might go.
Really?
Yeah, just because I think, again, with the Marvel stuff, as long as you're going to make films that are connected to each other even loosely and have that feeling of I have to go see the next one, because it leads up to the next thing. And now they're doing such a smart job of sprinkling in the Disney Plus stuff to keep you satiated in between. So it becomes a serialized thing, even if they're not connected, which is a kind of a wonderful thing that they've kind of ingrained into your brain.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, for every good Marvel movie, there's a Morbius, and if other studios keep putting out crap superhero movies, at some point those studios are going to have to take a step back and be like, we can't just pump $200 million in and make $100 million back.
Yeah.
Right? So at the end of the day, if we're talking, everybody's excited about Doctor Strange. Everybody's excited about the Marvels. Everybody's excited about Black Panther 2.
Yeah.
Who's excited about Kraven the Hunter? Who's excited about Madam Web? Are we true?
I assume the stars of those films are stoked. Aaron Taylor Johnson is so excited to be Kraven.
Well, that's more emotion than he's ever shown in any of his films. So, are we truly excited about DC movies? Like, how many of them are we really truly excited for?
Sure, yeah.
So I think, there's a bubble, but it's a bubble for everybody else, but Marvel and Disney.
And that's, man. It's almost like I script this for you because you give me perfect transitions sometimes. I first of all would agree, but I think secondly, I was during some of this research, I came across a paper that talked about how these things aren't the same. And one of the big things they mentioned is that this is an industry that pumps money into things and gets money back, right? Westerns never represented the chunk of money that comic book movies do. No. So again, 21 of the top 300 grossing movies in that 30-year period were Westerns. It's not nearly enough.
No. Westerns never carried the industry.
Well, and as to your point, that point, Marvel and DC alone, not even counting the Sony Spider-Man stuff, the MCU Spider-Man stuff is counted in this.
Yeah, okay.
The SpiderVerse isn't, though.
Okay.
But Marvel DC represent 25% of domestic box office this decade.
That's massive.
That's domestic. So in fairness, there is some superhero films that don't do as well overseas as other things.
Sure.
I think you start looking at this is a little more the last decade, but some of those Transformers films did kind of terrible domestically, but amazing overseas.
Yeah.
So you throw in the overseas, some of those numbers are going to dilute a bit.
Yeah.
But even so, 25%, that's ridiculous. So to your point, we're getting a Marvel movie or we're getting a superhero movie every month. It would have to be damn near that. Like, if 25% of the movies released were Marvel DC, this would be too much.
Yeah.
So clearly they are doing extremely well.
Yeah.
And the point this person made online was that ultimately the fact is there is too much money behind this for this to stop.
Yeah.
Westerns were easy to stop because ultimately there wasn't a lot of money behind them, and there wasn't that much money getting taken out of them. So this is a machine that will only stop when it is ground to a halt.
Yeah. And I think it's also really, really important to kind of take a step back and look at Westerns not as a movie genre. If we take a look at comic books, Westerns Western comic books were popular when Western movies were popular.
Sure.
And they died out as well. And same with TV, like Gunsmoke and all that stuff. The Western genre wasn't a genre that failed just at movies. It failed as a cultural
thing.
Which is insane to think about, right? But
totally.
it just becomes, you don't play cowboys in the yard at the park anymore because there's TV now, and it becomes a different thing. And then you go to movies, there's TV and stuff like that. So that weird home on the range lifestyle kind of goes away in the 60s and the 70s. and it shows in the comics. But superheroes have been around, and they kind of die off a little bit in the 40s and the 50s, but they have been a mainstay in pop culture since 1960.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And so to this day, whether or not physical comic books make a lot of money or not, or graphic novels make money or not, they still exist. They're not going anywhere. Those characters aren't going anywhere. So in my mind, if you can continue to make good movies, then those are going to stick around.
That's a great point. I think, to your point, some of the brilliance of superheroes too is their ability to adapt in the way that the cowboy never could.
Yeah.
Partially just because the world moved on,
Sure.
But Captain America, as a good example, starts out as a propaganda tool.
Yeah.
He's just, the super soldier. He's just
he's just selling war bonds.
buy war bonds, exactly, right? But he's become a bigger symbol than that.
Yeah.
And I would say he even went through a period, even as a superhero, where he was still, like Captain America. He was representing the American way.
Sure.
But has since, as the world became more globalized and more connected, has become far more of a worldwide figure than he is just an American figure. And there's been multiple stories in comics where he is, betrayed by the country he fights for.
Yeah.
Even if it's not like they literally stabbed him in the back, it's the comics had their own version of Watergate, where he suddenly decided he didn't know if this was the same country he loved, and so he's become a more worldly hero, and so his ability to adapt makes it more relevant as well. And then there's the whole other side of, I think that maybe during the height of Western's popularity, people probably still had family and friends and stuff that could have theoretically been cowboys. Kids, maybe their grandparents, like they rode horses, or they did this or that or the other thing.
Everybody lived on a ranch.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least you knew someone that did, and I'm not saying, back in the old days.
Yeah, like, do you think the 1950s was Little House on the Prairie?
No. But I just mean that there was a little bit more relatability there in terms of you knew someone that did. And I don't know anyone that lives on a farm, like, at all. I don't think I have my whole life. Or that like works on a farm, like a true farm.
Oh, like works on a farm? No.
Well, like, if you grow up, if your family farms, you are farming, like working as a child maybe isn't the word we use.
Our friend Carly lives on a farm, was born on a farm.
Oh, okay. Well,
you got fun. You got one.
I got one.
But
I've never heard that.
You wouldn't know it if you looked at her.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. Well, so either way, I just mean, I think that there's a degree of we've lost relatability there. While superheroes have constantly adapted,
Well, it's not even
grown.
not even just adapted, but they survive on having to adapt. And evolve and all that stuff. So it's I think you opened earlier. Is superhero movies its own genre? Absolutely, it is, because nobody can do no other genres can do the thing that superhero movies do.
Yeah,
and that includes the way they're told, it's the way they're distributed, and it's the way they're watched, and the way they make money.
Yeah,
it's just not comparable to anything I don't think we've ever really seen. We've seen the blockbuster,
sure,
but the blockbuster could encapsulate a whole bunch of things. Mm-hmm. Right at the end of the day, The Godfather was a blockbuster.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Maybe in its own right. Obviously, Jaws is the first blockbuster, so it precedes that. But some big, you know what I mean. But but those are not genre films. But when we talk about superhero films and Marvel movies, what other movies have ticket releases 2 months beforehand and seats that you have to get beforehand?
Well, ticket releases that are promoted on TV.
Yeah.
Like, that's also mind-blowing.
And advanced sales, right?
Yeah.
Like it used to be just Star Wars.
Yeah.
And
that's all we had.
and now, again, I think we've mentioned it before, but at the end of the day, it kind of blows my mind if you told 12-year-old Brenda, I'm like, hey, one day, you're going to have to buy Doctor Strange movie tickets 2 months in advance.
Yeah. Otherwise, you will not get to see it when you want to see it.
Like why? Like, is it too expensive? Or like, it's like, no, it's just like the theater will be full, and I'd be like, what are you talking about?
Are we talking about the same Doctor Strange?
So it just feels like a completely different thing to me.
So I guess my question is then, you think that there's a possibility that this is a bubble and that it pops for for every studio other than MCU.
Yeah, and it won't pop for DC in the same way, right? Like DC will always
have Batman,
always go away and then come back.
Yeah,
you know, you will have stuff like Batman and Robin, and then just quietly disappear until Batman Begins.
I honestly don't think we'll ever have Batman disappear again.
No, I probably not. And they're going to keep trying at it and trying at it and trying at it, because at the end of the day, even if it's a bad Batman movie, it's going to break even.
Yep.
And as long as Warner Brothers breaks even on those movies, they will keep trying until they make money.
Yeah, like a break even is a sign for them to pivot and try something a little bit different. Yeah. Not try Batman. Just bring in a different guy. You know?
As long as they have Batman, they'll stick around. But for every other studio, it's tough. You know, for every success that Sony has with a SpiderVerse movie, those animated movies, you know, is the $800 to $1 billion worth the amount of damage you're going to do with a Morbius or a Craven or a Madam Web movie?
Like, probably. You know, like, because we're talking literally over $1 billion.
Yeah.
So,
and Venom, right? Like, at some point, these bad movies are going to make money in spite of themselves as well. So.
Sure. Yeah, like, people will still see them, and no shame. People will enjoy them, and you know, and like, I truly think that, you know, you can always find someone that enjoyed a movie that, you know, was generally deemed to be terrible. So again.
Always got to take a shot at the Snyder Bros.
Like, that wasn't even officially a shot, though. I just mean, like, truly, if you loved Morbius, go nuts. Like, we're not going to stop digging at it. But
go nuts. You are nuts.
So, I want to just read point blank a quote James Gunn had said a couple of years back.
Sure.
Someone had asked him about the superhero genre and what the future of those films looks like. And he said, we know about the way cowboy films went and the way war films went. I don't know. I think you don't have to be a genius to put this and this together and see that there's a cycle to these sorts of films. You know, and that the only hope for the future of comic book and superhero films is to change them up. Thoughts? I have my own thoughts, but I'm curious.
I find it hilarious. I'll take a ton of heat for this. A ton of heat for this. I find it hilarious that a guy who is sitting there and saying we have to change it up makes the same movie over and over and over again. He does, and I agree.
Yeah. Because he did change things up. If this quote was pre Guardians of the Galaxy, sure.
Yeah.
You know, like, maybe I can see it. I don't know if we've had enough MCU content by that point to really say, well, this needs to change. You know, like, I think there's a little bit of variety there already. But this is a quote after he's put out Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and then The Suicide Squad.
This is recent then.
Oh yeah, very recent.
So the only way this quote lands for me is if he's saying it's not him that needs to change, but like the studios need to put in people to make that change. Which, if we took a look at Marvel, that's exactly what it did. Phase 2 was James Gunn. Phase 3 was Taika.
Sure.
You know, so you can put people in place to make those changes.
Yeah.
Maybe he himself needs to evolve as a filmmaker as well. I don't know. But if that's what he means by that, I'm on board. If he means that, no, we need to start making different things, then maybe you need to look at the mirror.
Yeah. I think he means the studios. I think that he's really getting at the fact that he's now worked for DC and Marvel.
Yeah.
They are both going after the same slice of the pie, effectively.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying we need to do something more. I've heard this argument online before that that Marvel movies aren't just superhero movies, and that they're already changing things up. The classic one is that Captain America: The Winter Soldier is a political / spy thriller.
Yeah.
Which I remember before that film came out. That's how some of it seemed. The trailers, like I think it was mainly that Robert Redford was in it. And I was like, okay,
that's like, a real movie.
Yeah. And then it wasn't that. Don't get me wrong. Winter Soldier is, as far as I'm concerned, one of, if not the best film in the MCU.
Hard to disagree.
Yeah, it's but it is squarely a superhero film.
Yeah.
Like, it is not. It doesn't do anything as far as the structure is concerned that other MCU films don't already do.
Yeah, and the easiest way to think about it is it's not a spy movie that just happens to have superheroes in it. It's a superhero movie that just happens to have spies in it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think in that same vein, or sorry, in the opposite side of that coin, though, is that there is some superhero movies that are kind of doing that. So Matt Reeves' The Batman is basically a noir detective film. And I think that's far more, the argument is far better that that's a noir detective film that has Batman in it.
Yes.
Versus the opposite. And don't get me wrong, I think that I can get a little bit of heat for that. That is still a Batman movie. And it is, still squarely a Batman, a superhero film. Yeah. But that's closer to the side of noir detective than I think basically any other, especially MCU movie, has been to being another genre.
Yeah,
than superhero
but that's almost because of the way our perception is of Batman because of previous movies, though. It's weird to be like, hey, this Batman movie is different because he's a detective. What are we talking about here? Like, he's the world's greatest detective. That's the nickname.
Yeah.
So I found it funny when people were like, oh, it was such a weird Batman movie that he was doing all this crime solving. I'm like, what the fuck? But we've been so trained to think of Batman in weird ways the last couple of years. Even the Nolan stuff, as good as they are, he's not as detective-y in those movies at all either, right? And then he's not, and then obviously he's the murder machine, the Snyder version. So it's weird to be like, oh man, that's how you make a Batman movie. You just read the comics.
Yeah.
It makes no sense to me.
What I'm getting at here, though, is that I think, aside from MCU, because I don't see us having a change in the MCU movies, and frankly, again, I love them. Yeah. I don't want a change in them. Yeah. But I think in order for us to avoid getting to a superhero bubble, and again, I don't know if we were ever going to have that. Like, the fact that people are still paying money for these movies.
Shang-Chi made $800 million, guys.
Yeah, like it's
not going anywhere.
It's not going. Yeah. But if we do want to have some sort of variation in this genre, which I think would be welcome, the Matt Reeves method or technique is the way we need to go. They need to be a little bit more genre films that are about a superhero. Yeah. Now, that all being said, I think that there's very specific pairings that work. Like, that does put people in a box a bit, because you can't have a noir detective film about, I don't know, like Mr. Freeze. Maybe you could. But I just mean that we're a little bit more limited. You can't have oh man, I'm going to set myself up again.
Here we go.
We can't have a romantic comedy about the Green Goblin.
I'd watch it.
Nope. I just, it definitely, there is only certain matchups that are going to work for that then.
Yeah.
And I grieve the fact that we didn't do more of a spy thriller thing for Black Widow. I haven't, when this episode is filmed, Doctor Strange 2 isn't out. That was initially supposed to be quite a horror film, or lean more into that. I don't think it's going to be.
Yeah.
And
the cracks are forming, right? It's not to say that it's not ever not possible, But the cracks are forming in terms of even Marvel, Eternals, the quality of Black Widow. Even if some people might like it, it's just not a good movie.
Or not as good.
No, not as good in terms of the bar
yeah.
of what they've set the table for already. And then Eternals trying something new, even changing up the formula, even just a touch.
Yeah,
caused a lot of caused a lot of backlash.
Yeah, totally.
It made money in spite of itself, but not Marvel money. So so a reactionary. I mean, if I was just a movie producer guy, and you put all those facts on the table, I'd be like, well, just go back to making the movies that made us $800 million.
Yeah, totally.
What's the problem? And that's exactly what they're going to do until it doesn't work anymore. But those guys are going to be smart enough that they'll find the pivot, right? And even now, under the guise of a multiverse, that's all sheen, right? Like it feels different. And look at all the wacky things that they can do.
Yeah.
Nothing changes.
Yeah, they effectively end up being the same, or and they're all MCU movies.
Yeah,
they're all, and we've talked about this many times about how the fact that there is, out of the 25 or whatever, there's 5 or 6 that rise above the rest and seem like really shine and stand out. And then there's, probably 2 or 3 that seem really bad, or noticeably worse than the rest.
Yeah.
And then there's like the rest in the middle, and they're good. They're consistent. They are fun. I have enjoyed them, and I will watch them again.
Yeah.
But it is extremely hard to take a look at Doctor Strange and Ant-Man and go, which one of these is better than the other? Because it's sort of different shades of vanilla. Like vanilla's delicious.
Yeah.
But you shove it all in there, and you can't really tell the difference. So
there's a little bit of carny in the Marvel stuff, though, right? Like it feels like guys promoting something new when it's not really new at all. Oh man, Professor X is in Doctor Strange, and I'm like, yeah, but we got 3 Spider-Mans. Like, is that going to be? Yeah, no, this is different. This is going to be a different thing. Yeah. I'm like, is it? Because the only difference to me is that Professor X will be funny in this.
And you might be right. And it's funny though, because we talk about stuff like this, and then I find myself getting excited for Professor X.
Sure,
we're talking about this in a cynical way, but then I still am like, well, screw you, man. Like, wait, hold on, I'm stoked.
And that's the thing too, is like I do talk about it cynically because I always have, but I'm there first day. I enjoy them for what it is. I enjoy the conversation afterwards.
Sure,
but I am very self-aware of what these movies are. And that sounds pretentious as hell.
Yeah.
But I know what I'm doing. I know I'm part of the wheel. I'm part of the cog, and I throw my money in, and then I sit here and I bitch and I moan about why do I do it.
So I guess how do they evolve from here? Like, is it about becoming genre films or becoming shifting genres, or is this just a matter of like I guess what I'm getting at is if we have, call it 12 is too many. If we have 8 superhero movies a year, even if they start pivoting to other genres, is there going to be a point where we just can't deal with it anymore?
No, because it's tough in my mind. It's because they're interconnected. It's one thing to be like, we're gonna make 4 Michael Keaton Batman movies and 4 Christopher Reeve Superman movies, but they have nothing to do with each other.
Sure.
But if you're telling me in a year I have to watch 8 movies and 6 of them have to do with each other, that's a different thing. It's serialized, right?
Yeah.
And it keeps you coming back. It's a reason why people watch TV weekly. It's the reason why people binge watch things. So, and I don't know what the evolution of that is, because that's the evolution. That's never been done before. It's not they're not sequels. They're not sequels.
No, they're not.
They just live in each other peripheral, which is an insane thing to think about for movies. So I don't know what the evolution is, because that's already it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think they're not sequels thing is worth unpacking a bit. Just that you can't go and watch, I don't know, Godfather Part 2 without having seen Godfather Part 1.
Yeah.
And you will be lost if you watch that sequel without having seen the original. However, the MCU movies are designed as much as you want to have, like you don't get all the nuances and stuff without having seen everything. But they are designed that you can pick up any one of those movies completely removed from the others and still enjoy it and have an idea what's going on. You get a quick introduction of, oh, this is the God of Thunder, and so if you haven't seen a single Thor movie, you're going to be still fine. You're going to be able to enjoy Thor Ragnarok on its own.
And on the other side of that, they're also completely designed to grab somebody who has no interest in a Shang-Chi movie, but because 2 people show up in a bumper credit for 30 seconds, you got to see it.
Yeah.
Right?
I guess they're both more like they're less connective than a true sequel.
Yeah.
But they're also more connective than a true sequel.
It's really, really, really strange. It's like a weird quilt.
Yeah, that's a great point. So outside of MCU though, does DC and Sony, do they need to start are we only going to get popular or successful Spider-Man films if they're in the SpiderVerse bracket? Are they only non-MCU Spider-Man films that are going to be truly successful in the way that No Way Home is going to be animated ones? Because I have a hard time sitting here and thinking, oh, Kraven the Hunter is going to be the next best entry, or Madam Web.
Yeah.
Like Kraven the Hunter, at the very least, has a history with comic books. I know the character. I have no idea who Madam Web is. Like when I heard of casting, I texted you and said, "Who is she?" And you went, "Eh."
Not knowing you were asking that she was going to be in a movie, and when I found out she was in a movie, I was like, "Why? What is this?" So there, but so much of it still has to be the right creative people, right? Like, the SpiderVerse stuff doesn't work without Lord and Miller.
Yep.
Yeah. And we can sit here and bag on Morbius or Kraven all we want, but if you put a creative team on that, or people I get excited about, you never know. You never know if you're going to get Kick-Ass, or if you never know if you're going to get, even Batman Begins. You just don't. Sure. You don't know.
Yeah.
So, but they're going to keep trying, and the that's, to me, is where it falls apart. It just doesn't feel like there's effort. It feels like everything is a race, and everything is a Band-Aid job of being like, well, let's just get it out there and just start building this thing so we can get to a Sinister Six movie, and that'll be the thing.
Yeah. That'll be our big one.
That'll be the big one. But if you took the time and just made 6 really good movies, then more people will go see Sinister Six.
Well, and that's interesting, just because I know that the time constraints for MCU stuff are quite strict. Like there is, they'll put a release date down and say this is when we're releasing whatever before they've really had, typically they're good about not announcing a title or what that is. They have their release dates figured out for the next decade, but they don't say what it is or who's attached to it until they have someone that is. So they'll attach someone to the project first, and then they'll announce, oh, it's whatever. Nope, not going to think of anything. Anyway, but it's whatever film. And so at the very least, they have the creative lined up first. It's better than them saying, oh, we're going to bring out Thor 5, but Taika already said he's not going to come back, so we'll figure it out, I guess. None of that's true, by the way. But I just mean, I
you heard it here first.
I just mean that if you're attaching people to, they seem to be going about it the right way. They're not like saying, well, you only have 4 years and we have no one ready to do this project. So that's a little bit better. The lack of effort is a great point, because the Morbius is another example. There's a great example of, the screenwriters attached to that have had failure after failure. Like, there's no reason that they should still be getting work in Hollywood at all, much less bigger and better work. They're getting more money. So, I think their movie just before Morbius was Gods of Egypt. And that was terrible. I didn't even see it, and I know it was terrible. they're the definition of failing upwards.
Yeah.
And it doesn't give me hope that they're putting the effort in, you know, like.
I think it's also really, really important to state, and this is going to be a little bit broad in terms of painting a segment of people, but for casual moviegoers, they roll blockbusters and superhero movies they paint them with the same brush.
Sure.
You know, so when we talk about things like a superhero genre bubble, it's very specific. But if I was to talk about a random moviegoer, they would consider the Transformers movies a part of that, or the Ghostbusters movies a part of that, and that's just a very different thing, in my mind, because that's the bubble. It's not the Marvel
blockbuster
movies.
Films or popular
it's
films.
Blockbuster films are the bubble. If we're talking about it, it won't. And we talked about Sony and maybe DC, but that's where I would lump those in. Is as people are big studios are starting to fight for screen time in the theaters with Marvel and Disney constantly, they're just going to keep putting out crap, and it's going to be a tougher thing for those companies to keep putting in hundreds of millions of dollars and losing money.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
That's where my bubble would be the actual genre film blockbuster, not Marvel movies.
Yeah. And I guess it depends on how you look at a bubble, because my thing with a bubble is, what do bubbles do? They burst.
Yeah.
Blockbusters are never going to burst.
Well, they'll burst.
Ever.
They'll burst in the sense that it used to be the summer blockbuster.
Yeah.
It's no longer the summer blockbuster.
Now it's all year.
It's all year.
Yeah.
So to me, the blockbuster burst would be like it's back to just May through July.
Oh, interesting.
I
would be shocked, frankly, to see that.
Yeah.
I don't think we're ever going to get to that point either.
But again, you're talking about it like there's not a Marvel movie in February, November, December.
Yeah.
So, but those are Marvel movies. So if you take those out, we're talking blockbusters.
Yeah.
Those aren't going to be around much longer, and they will just be put in the place of where Marvel movies aren't, which are not very many places.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think we've really noticed that during the pandemic as well, because whenever a major studio in particular, like Marvel, but Disney basically just shifted their whole release schedule at once. Whenever Disney shifts that schedule,
everybody shifts.
Everyone has to, because suddenly they're like, well, now we're opening up against Doctor Strange 2.
Yeah.
And we couldn't do that. Like, there's no way. So now suddenly they're like, well, I guess we'll bump it a little bit further down the line.
Yeah. And it's not even, it's weird too, because it's not even like day of. It used to be like, oh, we can't open the same day of Doctor Strange. Now it's like, well, we can't open the same month.
Yeah.
As Doctor Strange.
Like, maybe if there are different enough films, they'll say, oh, we can do the next week or 2 weeks. We'll do it 2 weeks out, you know? But even then, there's 52 weeks in the year, guys.
Yeah.
And then it's a sliding scale. Like, they bump out 2 weeks, and then the next project is like, well, we're even smaller than those guys, so we're gonna bump out, and then it's a whole trickle effect. Like, that's the reason we're getting a Top Gun movie releasing theoretically this year. Who knows?
One day.
But I saw the same trailer for that movie for like 3 years.
Yeah.
And so it was initially supposed to be summer 2020. The shift has been crazy.
Yeah.
I actually think Top Gun Maverick is the most shifted film, pandemic wise.
Yeah, probably.
I believe it was Bond initially, and then that came out. So
I mean, we're at this point, we're pretty close to like seeing like an in memoriam to Tom Cruise when this thing finally gets released.
Oh man, yeah.
As he tragically dies on the set of Mission Impossible 12.
I think that's basically all I have to say on the.
No, I think that was great
on the topic. So let us know if we're wrong. Let us know if we think
as always.
As always. And
we said a lot of stupid things here today.
There was a few things I know are not going to, or may not age well. And I will see you next week.